Hi, I'm Mary Greendale, and welcome to Just Thinking. Well, it's been 3 months, and that means it's about time to get a legislative report from State Representative Carolyn Dykema. I'm delighted to have you back again, Carolyn.
I'm delighted to be back again.
How are you?
I'm very well.
Now the weather's more like spring, summer, whatever, so here we go.
It is.
You're getting close to the end of the session, or this summer.
This summer, right. We'll go through the end of July.
Yep.
August is quiet, and then we're actually pretty busy. But we'll have, hearings straight through. Where, as you know, the session is 2 years long, so we're in the first year, so this will be the busier of the two from a legislative perspective.
You're in budget session right now, budget discussions.
We are. We finished our House budget. The Senate finished their budget, so we're in what we call conference time when we weigh in and kind of reconcile the two budgets, and then we will be done by July 1st is the end of our official budget.
Have you ever been on a conference committee?
No, I have not.
Yeah. They're interesting to watch, if nothing else. I've obviously never served on one, but they are interesting to watch. All right, so let's start with the really big important thing, and that's robocalls. I have a guy that keeps calling me. His name is Jason. And Jason has a different phone number every single time he calls me, so therefore I am unable to block Jason because I can't keep up with him. And I'm not kidding you. He calls me from all over the country. Anything I can do with Jason.
Yeah. No one can keep up with Jason, and I think that's the problem. And so I have been hearing about this issue for years. There has been legislation filed at the state level. The attorneys general from across the state have sent letters to Congress, have threatened the phone companies with action, and nobody has been able to do anything about these. The industry literally keeps one step ahead of the technology. It's like the whack-a-mole game. You know, you get one thing over here, something else pops up over here. So I have continued to talk about this and follow this, and was really thrilled that Senator Markey just recently, a couple months ago, filed some federal legislation, because that is where we kept coming to, is that because communications is largely handled federally, that the solution really had to be federal. So the legislation has been filed, and hopefully it'll require some accountability on the part of these phone companies.
So in order for us to feel any relief, we have to count on Congress.
I'm afraid so. I'm afraid so.
Why am I not feeling really thrilled with that? Okay, so.
But at least there's a recognition of the issue, and in fact, it's a bipartisan bill. So it's filed by Senator Markey and a Republican as well. So hopefully that will.
I mean, I guarantee that if you put that one out on Facebook, we could bombard every senator and every House member.
Well, the way I like to think about it is with all of the divisiveness that we see in the public sphere these days, I think that may be at least one issue that we can all come together
agree on. Yeah.
Especially seniors, you know, folks that are in their home.
Oh my goodness!
During the day.
It is amazing to me. Jason has a counterpart, Laura. I don't remember what Jason does, but he's got some medical insurance for me, and Laura does some other kind of insurance. But whatever. I mean, if you listen to them. And I did, just out of curiosity, they are the kinds of things you'd have to say are scams. You know, that they're enticing you to do something, to spend your money, basically. Right. And, yeah, if you believe that they're real and that Jason's going to be your new best friend. Anyway.
Well, the challenge is, too, with the evolving technology is that they can replicate local numbers now.
Oh, I know.
So I just got one the other day that was a 429. Number.
Exactly. Exactly. It does happen, so you can't just automatically go boom.
So the best thing, they say, I mean, if there is something you can do, is just don't answer them.
Yeah.
Because every time you answer them, they recognize that it's a real number. And actually what was interesting to me is that I saw an article in the New York Times a little bit ago saying that even if no one answers the phone and no one buys anything, the companies that are doing this still make money. The financial model is such that they still get a very tiny margin every time a call is made, regardless of the outcome of that call. So that is why they keep at us.
Intensity of it. Oh, my God. All right, well, let's talk about, I suppose, real issues, although that one's really frustrating every single day, and education funding is only irritating upon occasion. But let's talk about education. Obviously, education comes at many different levels, so we've got the whole discussion of K through 12. We've got the college issues of not just loans and that kind of stuff, but the admission and entry fees, if you will, to get into the state schools and that kind of stuff. There's also pre-K, which is, you know, another piece that sort of floats out there as being somebody's got to be talking about it. So let's start with K through 12. How did Holliston do this year?
Well, you know, we did increase school funding. I mean, we've increased at a higher rate than we have in the past, which you know, is reflective of the state budget incremental increases. And I will say, you know, big picture-wise, obviously, education is at the top of our list. It's something that parents care a lot about and our constituents care a lot about. But obviously, it's incredibly important economically to us here in Massachusetts. One of the two issues that I hear about, one of the things you had mentioned was the voc training. But workforce training is now one of the top issues that employers ask about here in Massachusetts, in addition to transportation. So it's really, when you have employers saying that they're having a hard time finding the workforce that is trained with the right skills to fill the jobs that they need to fill, and jobs are being left empty because we don't have the right skills, that's, you know, underscores the importance of education here in Massachusetts.
When I was at the Department of Housing and Community Development, let's figure out, I left in '99, so whatever that decade, they were saying the same thing. Okay, we had one company from Pittsfield come in and talk to us, and they were complaining that kids couldn't read a ruler. Okay, didn't know how to read the markings on a ruler. And it was a big flurry. What happens? I mean, I thought we made steps at that time. Did we not make big enough steps? Did we make the wrong steps? I mean, maybe it's a combination.
Well, it's an evolving combination, or evolving conversation. And if you remember, Barbara Gardner, my not immediate predecessor, but before that was very involved in 1993 in the Education Reform Act,
Bill,
which gave money to cities and towns based on a formula to supplement local property tax revenue and supporting the schools. So we're at a point now where we're essentially, you know, taking another look at that. When you think of everything that's happened in that period of time,
25, 26 years,
with healthcare costs related to employees, with just technology alone and the amount of technology that's needed to provide students with an up-to-date education, special education costs in that time. There was a recognition, and the legislature acknowledged that by passing legislation that had that created a foundation budget review commission to really look at the state of education today and update that formula to recognize those local needs, including like English language learners. If you think about the number of English language learners, even in Holliston.
Yeah, we never had any, and now we do.
It's significant, and the number of languages. It's not just one language, it's multiple languages. So how are we going to recognize that, not only through how the funding, the available funding is distributed to schools, but also how much funding there is available to go to schools. And so we're dealing with both of those issues right now. There's the biggest conversation is around what's called, well, there's one called the Promise Act, which has been filed on the Senate side and is being promoted by the Senate. There's a corollary in the House, and the governor's also filed a piece, which all would propose to put much more money into K-12 education. But the details are different. How that money comes down, how much of that funding is focused on underperforming schools versus you know, schools that are standard performing schools. All of those questions are kind of being worked out and debated, and I believe it got stalled at the end of last session. It was expected to pass, and we kind of came to an impasse. So, but I do expect within the next year or so we'll see some kind of compromise bill come out of that. We've seen a lot of activity at the State House, a lot of advocates coming in to push for that funding. And I think you'd hear the same thing here in Holliston and all the local communities, that more funding is needed to keep pace with what
all
has
the
to be done.
change.
Yep.
So does that include vocational schools?
Vocational schools are a different animal. And I think, you know, you had brought this up in your comments earlier, and I think vocational schools are getting a whole new look.
Good.
As are all of the educational opportunities for what you would call middle skill jobs. That's where we're hearing most pointedly from employers about the need for different types of training, and I think there's a real opportunity for us educationally. So partnering, doing more partnering across different educational facilities. So whether it be vocational schools working closely with our core K-12 systems to address some of the backlogs. We've seen vocational increases in interest. So now we have waiting lists in some areas for voc tech educations. How can we have our voc schools working with our K-12 to try and address some of those backlogs and maybe provide some more of those voc type programs in the K-12 schools? How can we have our voc schools working, for example, with community colleges to provide some of those same skill sets that maybe aren't geared toward the high skill jobs like we normally think of with a four-year degree, but a whole lot of other types of jobs that are ready to be filled, that are career-oriented, provide great advancement opportunity in some local businesses that can be directly addressed through voc schools.
Well, I remember Fran Colantonio, who owns the construction company,
Right.
Colantonio Incorporated.
Great example.
Coming into the schools talking about the trades. I mean, talking about students leaving high school and trying to become journeymen or whatever. The different trades have different kinds of names for these things, but to intern and train under and then become part of that, because when you look at some of those salaries, many of their salaries are six-figure salaries.
And he can't find the folks
and he can't
to
find
fill
them.
the jobs that he needs.
Exactly, exactly. So clearly something's wrong. How it gets fixed, you know.
Well, one of my favorite programs, actually, that we continue to fund and increase funding for is a Workforce Skills Grant, which partners our voc schools with businesses. So if you are a business that is a manufacturing company that has a specific skill set or a specific type of machinery that you need training for, there is a grant that you can work with one of the voc schools to partner to apply for one of these grants, and the grants will actually pay for the machinery in the voc tech schools, and then the tech schools will work with the company to develop a curriculum so that it's a feeder program. So when these kids come out of high school, they can potentially walk right into a local job.
I've never heard of
filling
that
a
one.
local need. Yeah,
So how popular is that?
it's fairly popular.
I haven't heard anything about it. It needs more promotion. So, okay, so
And I think it's a model, actually, that the voc schools are going to be looking at for other types of, that's focused on manufacturing. But I think, you know, there are opportunities to use that same model in other types of needs as well.
when my kids were in high school here in the 70s and early 80s, there was, well, late 70s and 80s, there was you know, you had a track, you had different tracks. You had a business track you could have taken, and it was pretty in-depth. I mean, you graduated with the needed skills to go into office, you know, whatever kind of work. And then there was also a training for woodworking and tech, you know, more of those tech kinds of things. But at any rate, one by one, those went away as focus started to change, and I guess probably as business change needed different kinds of things. So
And I really think the pendulum is now
it's just swinging back.
And you're seeing a lot of activity, a lot of energy in some of these voc schools when you go meet, you know,
Wow.
visit the programming there.
Wow.
It's tremendous.
It is. I went up to Neshoba a couple of years ago for something, and oh my good grief, that was an amazing experience, because I've been over at Keefe Tech, and I don't get the same energy vibe there, but boy, Neshoba was amazing.
They all have their different, you know,
Yeah.
specialties. Assabet is another
Yeah, they have-
local
yeah.
local programming, plus the clean energy field.
Yes.
You know, the clean
Totally
energy,
one.
you know, installing some of these solar panels that we need for a lot of reasons. There will be some state funding to provide, to put up more solar panels on public buildings. We need the workforce there. Voc schools are where they get that training.
All right. So then in terms of education here locally, anything that we should be talking about, mentioned that folks need to be aware of? Anything in them?
Well, I know that the school committee is talking about early start times and changes in start times. That's something that's been kind of kicking around the legislature for a while now. There's been a bill that would create a study group to look at that start time issue, and as a parent who had 3 kids come through the schools, I think it's an important issue. And we've heard from, medical folks who agree that earlier start times are worth looking at for older students, especially teenagers who do better when they start a little bit later in school. So that's a local issue. There was a statement of intent, and this is sort of a partnership between local school districts and the state for construction of school buildings. So one of the things that we met with the school committee and Superintendent Jackson and the selectmen on a number of months ago was on renovations to the high school, or looking at the proposal or potential for a new high school. So part of that process is that the town submits a statement of intent to the state, to the Mass School Building Authority, that you're, I'm sure, familiar with, for review. So the state then comes in. The state does these buildings, obviously, all the time.
Right.
There's a program. They've got the expertise. There's no need for towns like Holliston to reinvent the wheel when it comes to designing and anticipating what needs are for schools today. The School Building Authority provides a lot of that expertise. So the school with the selectmen initiated this process. It's kind of a longer-term process. But, starting to think about how do we make sure that we had talked about the evolving nature of education and technology and how kids learn. The buildings need to reflect what happens in the buildings.
True.
So this will be an exercise in looking at our high school specifically to see whether it meets the needs and whether, we need to make some upgrades, whether we need a new building, and then, of course, to have the conversation as a community about how and whether to move forward with that. But the state does provide some significant funding to the town to be able to take that on, as long as the town follows the state guidelines to do so.
Lots happening there. Lots happening there.
Lots happening there.
I'm already planning if the town decided to build a new high school, what kind of housing and community center and kind of thing this building could be. But anyway, we'll wait for that conversation.
Yeah, right. Maybe a little premature, Mary, but someday. Someday.
Oh, well, at any rate. Okay, so Chapter 90 funding on roads. Everywhere you go right now, everything is tied up
Potholes.
with construction. Well, if you haven't got potholes, you've got construction. But
'tis the season.
Yes. And they're talking about major construction that's going to happen on the Mass Turnpike and down at the end as it enters into Boston and so forth and all of that. So roads and traffic and all that kind of stuff. But let's just talk about the Chapter 90 money.
Yep.
We've got it coming.
We've got it
every year.
Right. So the legislature, one of the calls that I get this time of year is when are the potholes going to be fixed?
They call you.
And they do call me.
They don't call the highway department. That puzzles me.
They may call the highway department as well.
I see. Okay.
They may eventually get to me. And I do get the calls.
I think that's interesting.
Yeah, it's amazing what we get calls for. Oh. I'm flattered that people would think to call, so people should call. So there is a program at the state level that provides cities and towns with transportation funding for road repair, but can also be used for sidewalks. The town really decides how it wants to spend that money every year. So in April, which is about the time that the asphalt factories open and that construction can start, the legislature passes a bond bill that provides that funding that then comes down to the cities and towns through a reimbursement formula. So every city and town, based on road miles and types of roads, gets an allocation of this funding and submits their invoices after the work is done and then gets reimbursed by the state. So most towns kind of have a plan of how they're going to use that money every year, and it's generally the same amount of money every year that we pass in bond funding, which is $200 million, which I think for Holliston is somewhere in the neighborhood of $130,000, $140,000.
Not that much money, really.
It's not a year. I mean, it's an expensive proposition, and it certainly doesn't cover all of the costs, but it's something, and it helps to stay on top of the roadways.
I think it's worth mentioning that, or repeating what you just said, that the town decides about sidewalks, and that we could, if we chose to, shift some of the money that we get, whether it's from Chapter 90 or money that we put in, we could shift some of it to sidewalks and not streets. And that's, I think, an interesting conversation you know, as we move forward.
And a conversation, honestly, that's happening at the state level. And I know you have been a big proponent of walkability and bikeability, which is a lot of conversation going on around that, around local bike trails. And in fact, all of the state projects, I've got a couple of state projects going on in my district, and if you are getting state funding for a major intersection project, for example, like Hopkinton is undertaking, you are required to look at both pedestrian access, so sidewalk design, as well as bike lanes as part of those upgrades. And unfortunately, you know, sometimes it's only done in one area that's being fixed, but eventually, you know, the idea is to create a full network of pedestrian and bicycle access so that people can get out of their cars and get healthy and, you know, support local downtowns. The walkability also supports our local downtowns to get people to stop in local businesses and support them.
What, has there anything changed or any conversation continued about traffic issues in general? I know that's all part of the transportation world, so how's the traffic going?
Yeah, it's there.
It's there.
It's there and it's growing. How's that? Yeah.
And do you find it affects your life?
Oh, every day. Every day. It can take me 2 hours to get into Boston on the Mass Turnpike in a window from probably 6:30 in the morning till 9 o'clock in the morning. So it's no longer a rush hour. And it is a serious concern. And I had mentioned that, you know, employers, that was one of the top two. And you're starting to hear them be more vocal in the newspaper about the need to address transportation from an economic perspective, so we don't start losing folks to other states that have less congestion. And in fact, there was a study done recently. Massachusetts has more supercommuters. I don't know if I mentioned this last time we talked, but the number of supercommuters, which is I think the number of commuters that commute for more than 2 hours or some lengthy period of time to get to their jobs, is growing. And at some point you reach a tipping point there where people say, you know, spending 4 hours in my car every day that I don't get paid for is not worth it.
Yep. And when you start looking at it in dollars and cents, it becomes totally impossible.
Right. So it is an economic imperative for us to address this issue. But, you know, I look at it from a family imperative. Bill takes the train every morning or sits in traffic to get into Boston, and those hours are hours that he can't be home, you know, with the family, and certainly hours I can't be home with the family. So there are a lot of reasons to take on the traffic.
Yesterday there was a story about some organization, I could find it if you need be, but that is talking about trying to get 2 trains from Worcester to Boston all day long. Okay, in other words, recognizing that commute times are no longer 9 to 5. That people, for some businesses, can go in at 11 and come home at 7, or that whatever, that just trying to get 2 tracks going and running the trains more frequently.
Well, even bigger picture, we need to start thinking about not getting people into Boston all the time, but it's really a continuous loop between Boston and Worcester, because you're seeing more people working in Worcester.
Sure, that are going out to Worcester to.
You're seeing folks that need to come out from Boston to Metro West in the morning and then back at night. So I agree with you, and that's one of the things that I've been advocating for on the commuter rail vision advisory group that I sit on at the state level, which is a long-term vision for what commuter rail needs to look like. And that people will start seeing more of that. There's going to be a draft plan that's going to come out in the next couple of months for public feedback that includes more of this continuous service, you know, every 15, 30-minute service throughout the day to allow people more flexibilities. Upgrades to the infrastructure, including potential looking at electrification of the trains, which is important for climate reasons and congestion, you know, to just make it more reliable.
So when this report comes out, should we either do a show, have a meeting out here, something? I mean, let's get this out
Yeah,
there.
I'd like to, the group, the MBTA group that's dedicated to this has actually been doing road shows.
Okay.
And I would love to get them out here to talk to my district and explain what's going on. And again, to get the public feedback, you know, hear people, where people are going.
This is where we are.
If this is something that is important to them, because at the end of the day, we're going to have to figure out how to get it done, which is going to require public support.
Yeah, but I mean, they're commuting from here. You know what I mean? A lot of the pressure is coming from here and farther west. So,
and the other thing to think about, the thing that really has become apparent to me, is that you have to think about not public transit in isolation of, it really needs to be a conversation about door-to-door commute. So how do I get from my home to the train? Do we need more parking? Do we need more shuttles? Do we need, you know, more earlier service? And then on the back end, and how do we collect fares? That's the one thing that we keep hearing all the time.
I know.
Is, you know, for all the funding needs and need to upgrade things, if fares aren't being collected reliably, it's awfully hard to build public support for.
That's always been an issue. I mean, even when I would commute on the train, and that's eons ago now. You know, relying on the conductor to collect tickets or the conductor to do the transaction or whatever. I mean, it's just like, wow, you get the next load of people in, and so the first load, if he hasn't finished, they're buried, and you'll never see them again until they're leaving, and you won't remember whether or not you collected from
And there's
them.
got to be a technology
for
solution.
heaven's
You know,
sakes.
and there's an ongoing effort called AFC 2.0, Automatic Fare Collection 2.0, that is in process, that is taking a lot longer than a lot of people had hoped it would, but it is on the table, and something that eventually, you know, you'll have turnstiles. So when you run your ticket before you actually get on the train, so you don't have to have the conductors to do that.
Well, this is a digression, but if the other day I had the folks on here talking about our new recycling and trash collection. And as part of the recycling, one of the big issues is that dirty recycling or recycling the wrong products sort of jettisons the whole package right out. So they have actually the technology to be able to see into the barrel to know whether or not what you have in that barrel at your address with a chip on it that identifies it as your address. So they can tell whether Mary Greendale put dirty trash into the recycling bin. Okay? If they have the technology to do that, surely they can get me on the train and collect my fare.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just like, come on. Got to be able to do it.
Yeah.
So I think there's just got to be some financial incentive in there somewhere that makes it happen.
One of the other conversations that's coming up that's going to be important is the contracting of services for the commuter rail. So as you may know, the commuter rail, not the T itself, which is run by the state, but the commuter rail is a public-private partnership where we contract with a private provider, who right now is Keolis, that provides those services. And there are some challenges with that contract that I think prevent us from getting the best service that we could. And one of the most significant ones is that Keolis is responsible for delivering on reliability and timeliness, but they're not responsible for the equipment to the cars. So the T is responsible for that and responsible for deciding whether or not to provide them with upgraded equipment. So, you know, I think there needs to be consistent control there. Someone needs to have control over the whole picture to be able to make it work and to be held accountable for making it work, and to not allow for sometimes the finger pointing that happens about, you know, who's responsible for this and who.
This is similar to private control of prisons to me. Okay, this is a public activity. This is a public service, and therefore I believe it belongs in the public realm. I don't know where I went awry, but somehow these public-private partnerships that were the big thing during the Weld administration in the 90s, and everybody was talking about them as the saving grace, you know, looking back, it's like, not so much, not always.
I guess, you know, to me, you need to look at it in an individual case-by-case basis, because if you look at the T system, the core MBTA system, you know, we've had 2 derailments in the last couple of weeks, and that is purely publicly run. So there are challenges no matter where you are. I think, you know, good management, whether it's state management or private management is essential, and I think you need to recognize that you need to put the investments in. And I think both systems have strong management right now. I think actually Keolis, I'm really impressed by the gentleman who's the general manager, English gentleman, who, boy, he grew up with trains. He actually started, I think, collecting fares on a train when he was, 14 years old and worked his way up through the system. He knows his stuff, is a wealth of information, but needs to have the resources. And I sort of feel like a broken record, but especially when it comes to transportation. Ever since I've been in this job, we've been talking about transportation. The first year in 2009, Deval Patrick was talking about how we have a $20 billion transportation backlog, a lot of it because of the Big Dig, which took all of our federal money, which is one of the largest pots of money that we have for transportation, and funneled it into a discrete project, which meant that all of the other projects across the state, including public transit, didn't get maintained. And now we're paying the piper. And we've been kicking that can and continued to kick that. We're still kicking that can. And the reality is we do need to find more funding to do it. And actually, interestingly, the funding that we do have isn't even being spent, and this is where we come full circle. In working in the state, you find that eventually everything is connected in some way. They can't even spend the money that we do have because they don't have the workforce, the trained, skilled workforce, to be able to manage the projects, to be able to plan and design the projects. So it's as much of a workforce problem as it is a funding and a revenue problem.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right, so for a little light conversation, hands-free driving.
Hands-free driving. Massachusetts is going there.
Oh, wow.
Now, my challenge is to get my Bluetooth to finally work and get my phone to sync up.
Yeah. Now, my granddaughter does mine. You want her to stop by?
I'm gonna get my millennials to stop. We've actually tried a couple times and it hasn't worked, so we got to get on that.
Yeah, really. And now I discovered that I actually have choices on my Bluetooth of whether it's under Carolyn's phone or Joey's phone or one of the kids' phones or mine. And so sometimes it'll just be on the wrong person's phone, and I won't know what to do with it until, as I say,
thank goodness for grandchildren.
Yes, I guess so. But at any rate, so we do have legislation?
Yes, it's passed
Signed?
both. No, it's passed both the House and the Senate. Working out some details. It will be signed.
No reason to assume that the governor wouldn't sign it.
No,
he's been a big proponent.
It's just a matter of how exactly when it will be signed.
How does enforcement work?
So the important thing I think for the public to know about this legislation is, while it does take effect immediately on passage, there is a grace period where there will be no fines imposed. We recognize that there's a public education period that needs to go along with this. So you may get pulled over if you're holding any handheld device is not permitted. You may get pulled over and given a warning. I'm trying to remember. Well, we haven't finalized the legislation, but I think the grace period is a year for implementation. So enforcement is just visual.
Traffic enforcement.
Visual, right, by the police.
So if you're driving along and you're just talking to yourself, I mean, I guess it could be you're talking to yourself or you're talking on your phone. They're not going to stop you to see whether or not you have the phone in your lap or you whatever.
It's the act of physically holding a device that is prohibited. So, however, it's a challenge. I mean, it's been a challenge with texting and driving.
Yeah.
Enforcement, I think, is the biggest challenge.
Sure.
A lot of those don't hold up if they're challenged in court.
Yeah.
And we're going to have similar challenges here, but I think it will be a little easier, and the payoff for public safety is well worth it.
And some cars don't have the Bluetooth option. So,
well, I think eventually all the cars are going to catch up.
Yeah. So let's just talk quickly about the graduated income tax proposal and what's going on with that. We've talked about it from time to time over my life, but here it is again.
Yeah, here it is again. Well, as I'm often reminded, whenever it comes up, Massachusetts has not supported this for decades and decades.
Yep.
So it will be interesting to see where it goes. I'd be curious actually to get feedback from the public. I haven't heard there hasn't been a lot of public awareness
about it at all
around it. The history to this bill is that it almost was on the ballot in 2018.
Yep.
And it was challenged, and it was found to be unconstitutional the way it was structured.
Right.
Because it was originally structured to be dedicated to transportation and education only, and the way that it was written was not appropriate. So it's going to come back. It has a lot of support. Different advocacy groups are very supportive. They have had to gather thousands of signatures to get to where they got before. So there's a lot of public interest in at least bringing it to the ballot. So the legislature has to, it's a constitutional amendment that would allow for a graduated income tax. The proposal is that any income over $1 million would be taxed at a 4% higher rate than income at under $1 million. So it's a two-tiered graduated income tax. You know, a number of other states have graduated income taxes. Most of them are multiple tiered.
I was going to say, yeah.
And it's, the proposal is different than what you would think about with your federal taxes, where you're in a tax bracket.
Yes.
This is different in that regardless of how much you make, anything under $1 million is still taxed at the, what is now 5.05% income tax. It's just the incremental amount that would be taxed at the 4% increase. So the process for a constitutional change is that it has to be voted on favorably by the legislature twice. I expect later this afternoon that second vote will take place. Today is the, what is it, the 11th? June 11th? 12th. So we're going to be voting tomorrow or this afternoon on that. And then it's expected that that will be on the ballot for the public to weigh in on the 2022 ballot.
I'm just a little puzzled as to why there's no relief provided down at the end, the bottom. You know what I mean? In my mind, a graduated income tax is more of a
to do maybe a three-tiered,
yeah, you know, multiple tiered, so that the really impoverished are not, you know, penalized.
And I think, you know, I didn't have anything to do with drafting the proposal. I think there was a lot of thought put into what might get support from the public, and I think there was maybe a thought that there were that the proposal that was moved forward was more likely to get support. But we will see. We will see.
All right. Well, you're at least going to be traveling at a time of day that's not as bad.
That's right. I've missed the real rush hour.
Real rush hour and everything. Thank you for joining me yet again.
Thank you for having me.
I will see you in another 3 months.
That sounds great.
Well, that'll be at the end of that'll be at the end of summer. Oh, the weather's changing. Oh, thank God, it's cooling off. All right. Thanks. All right. Thanks again, Carolyn.
Thanks, Mary.
We'll talk again in 3 months with Carolyn, and in the meantime, we'll see you with some other conversation. So take care. Thanks.